We are very keen to learn as much as we can about the economy, even though nobody seems to care. The rest of the country doesn't care, nor does Parliament. So, but doesn't matter. We will continue on our journey, trying to learn what's happening in this economy, trying to learn how things work or not work.
Privatization, we have absolutely no choice. Public sector, we have a huge public sector, and when you have public sector, you have absolutely people who are directors or people who manage them have no stakes. So the role of the government should be really to govern and to regulate, and the business should be in the private sector.
I was able to do the economic dispatch for the first time between 2001 and 7. And during that time, I reached the saving up to a saving of rupees 25 crores a day by optimizing the generation, and 25 crores a day at that time, not of today.
Welcome to PIDE webinar. PIDE is a national think tank that tries to get a debate going on all national policy items, economic items, socio-economic items, public policy items. We are very keen to learn as much as we can about the economy, even though nobody seems to care. The rest of the country doesn't care, nor does Parliament. So, but doesn't matter. We will continue on our journey, trying to learn what's happening in this economy, trying to learn how things work or not work, and trying to see if at any time in the future, in the next century, anybody wants to make a change, how change can be made. So, not very optimistic, but we will continue to do it. So, with that sort of opening, let me turn to the privatization of electricity distribution. A much talked about subject, even though I'm probably the first free marketeer in the country, having studied in Chicago, and I've been advocating free market and privatization policies for a long time. But at the same time, what I've discovered over the years is that how you do things is very important. How you make markets is very important. How you privatize is very important. You can do things wrong and end up in a mess. So that is why we want to talk about how privatization can or cannot be done. And we should try and think about doing things well rather than just doing them because it seems easy. It seems very easy to say privatization is the answer to everything, but we have seen how we've done privatization badly. For example, PTCL. For example, many other privatizations that we reversed, like steel mill, like other things. So with that, we are turning today to privatization of electricity. But in doing so, we will also take up the only DISCO that has been privatized, which is the K Electric. So I would like to turn to the panel. As you can see, we've got a very good panel. We've got Salahuddin, Rafai Sahab, power sector expert, former chairman board of directors, IESCO. We've got Maria Rafique, an energy lawyer. We've got Ovais Naqvi, who is a partner in Rise Capital, but has been involved in KE for a long time. He knows about it. And then we've got Asad Shah Sahab, hopefully you'll join us, who is been on the board of the K Electric and knows the system very well. So with that, let me just quickly turn to let's turn to Asad Shah Sahab. Asad Shah Sahab, can you tell us very quickly, did we do K Electric right? Have we benefited from that privatization, or have we not? And if so, what should we have done differently in order to benefit from it? Over to you, Asad Sahab.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nadeem Sahab and PIDE for inviting me on this this webinar on privatization of utilities. And I think I'll start with the background that you have given. I totally agree with your statements that I heard when I joined, that privatization, we have absolutely no choice. Public sector, we have a huge public sector, and when you have public sector, you have absolutely people who are directors or people who manage them have no stakes. So the role of the government should be really to govern and to regulate, and the business should be in the private sector. So talking about the privatization of KE, Karachi Electric, as you said, is the only utility that was privatized in 2005. And it's a very interesting case study, I think, which needs to be done. I suggest, I think organization like PIDE or someone else should do this comprehensive case study and research on this. There are obviously pluses, pros and cons. The problem actually started, I mean, the privatization of KE was, the need for it was definitely there. It was, when it was privatized in 2005, it had huge losses. I think till 2004, its transmission and distribution losses had gone up to 36% on a year before, up to even 39, 40%. So in 2005, I think the privatization started. It was 2 years process or so, and it's no brainer that it was the right thing to do. But the most surprising thing was that the bidders which came were, there was this Saudi company, Kanuz Al Watan Group, which was the successful bidder. They had bid 15.8 billion rupees for 73% of the KESC shareholding for 9.45 billion shares out of 12.7 billion which the government held. So actually it was offer for sale. So government was selling its own shares, And with them, there was this private Hassan Associates, interestingly. Hassan Associate, as we all know, there is Hassan Square in Karachi. They were in the business of this housing. And there's no information on Kanuz Al Watan. So they were a successful bidder, and the government agreed to privatize. They accepted their bid, but they were not able to pay the amount. So immediately then we see there is this Al Jumeirah of Saudi Arabia, which comes in. And the facts that I'm sharing, these are the facts based on my study of KESC's annual reports from 2005 to 2012. Unfortunately, I was only able to study that. But, since I remained the board member and I have been studying, I will also talk about subsequent period. But in 2005, November, I think this management changeover took place. And I think it was 71% share originally, which were given to KES Power, offshore company based in Cayman Island, which was substantially owned by Al Jumeirah, and 26% shares remained, 24% shares remained with the government. So that is how the privatization took place. Now, if you look at the, performance from 2006 to 2011, very briefly, I can give you the results. In fact, when the government privatized, obviously company had losses, and government actually also gave them a lot of benefits. So there was, I think, 13.7 billion rupees financial improvement program that was going on. Some of it, part of it was given when there was public sector management. Approximately 8 or 9 billion rupees was given during the period when this original shareholders were managing, from 2006 to 2008 or so. And apart from that, government also gave them other grants and I think concessions. And But when we see the results, actually, and also to, I think, highlight the structure that was formed by the new group, and as you will see, Al Jumeirah is also a transport company. They had no experience or expertise in the power sector. So, frankly, the first question that arises is that how the shortlisting was done. Because, as you were saying, when you're privatizing a utility, utilities are public interest organizations, you see. These are not just assets. It's not just simple auction of enterprises. It's not a sale of real estate. It's basically, about 2 million consumers. Their interest is also involved. So there should have been some thorough process, shortlisting process. Apparently, there was no such process. And even the annual reports will clearly highlight that despite government support, first 4 or 5 years, rather up to 2010-11, the company did not do well. You see, the key indicators, the key problems with the Karachi Electric was, one was that they had very expensive generation and they were dependent on WAPDA. So they were supposed to create some more economical generation, and it was also planned when the new management came. They had to do system improvements, and for which government was also providing them grant of 8 billion rupees. And of course, they had to, the key indicators was that transmission and distribution losses were required to be reduced. So if you look at up to 2000 financial statements or the annual report from 2006 to 2010, the situation was such that in 2004-05, KE's transmission and distribution losses, as reported in the annual report, were 34.23%. And, they actually went up in 1 or 2 years, and 1 or 2 years slightly decreased. In 2008, 2009, they actually went up to 35.85%. And 2010, they were around 34.89%. Effectively, no improvements, and the company continued to incur huge losses. I think when the company was privatized, its financial losses, accumulated losses, were about 22 billion rupees. And till the time of 2011, they continued to incur losses, and the total losses actually increased to 87 billion rupees from 22. So around 50 billion rupees of losses or more were incurred during this period. So there was absolutely no improvement. There was actually continuous decline. Now, model, just briefly talking about the model, obviously because everybody recognized Al Jumeirah had no experience of running a utility. So they appointed Siemens as a partner for operations and maintenance. But it became very clear they were also required to implement some technology, SAP. They were supposed to do improvements. But frankly, T&D losses either remained stagnant or they kept on increasing. The losses remained the same or they kept on increasing. And Siemens, was not able to do any operations and maintenance. And in terms of governance and oversight also, frankly speaking, as reflected, and I'm just saying, I'm not giving any opinions. I mean, just review their reports, and their own reports will highlight that effectively there was no improvement or very marginal improvement, and the losses kept on increasing. So up to 2011, their losses kept on increasing. I think that was the reason Siemens was fired in 2 years. And I may also mention that Siemens actually had no experience of running a utility. They are equipment suppliers, so this aspect was also missed by the Privatization Commission and the government. And it is also very interesting to see, when you privatize utilities and public interest entities, there was also an implementation agreement, and there has to be some oversight to see how much improvement is there in the key performance indicators, et cetera, et cetera. But somehow I think there was no oversight. I think the regulation, the NAPRA regulator was also established by that time. I do not observe any significant oversight and monitoring from NAPRA also. So things continued to deteriorate. Just to briefly, I think, summarize, and as we all know, in 2008, I think the original shareholders realized that they were not able to manage the utility. And informally, obviously, I think the talk was going on. So they went to Abraj, I suppose. And Abraj, as you know, by that time had emerged as one of the major private equity group. So Arif Naqvi, I think, decided to invest. And in 2008-9, Abraj, agreed to invest. So what they did was they obtained shares of KES Power, I think majority, which had 71% shares at that time. Now they have about 66% shares. So this holding companies, I think 52 or 54% shares were acquired by Abraj. And that money and some amount directly was came into KE also. And from 2009 to 2012, I think $300 million were brought in by Abraj. So we do see significant improvement, I think, just looking at the annual reports from 2012 onwards. 2012 was the first year that KE turned profit. They made some profit of 2 billion rupees. And after that, I think they started making some money. And as then in 4 or 5 years, because the KE had become profitable, and then we were under CPAC, Chinese had started taking interest. So in 2015-16, I think because they are private equity, Abraj decided to exit. And I think one must also mention that they were also able to negotiate and get considerable concessions from the government in terms of restructuring of some of the liabilities and a better tariff, performance-based tariff. So based on that, SEP, Shanghai Electric of China, decided to invest in KE in 2015 and 16. They did their due diligence, but that was that. And they decided to actually buy KES Power, or the 66% of the KE, for $1.7 billion. So that apparently was a fantastic deal for us and original shareholders. But I think there was a big but there, because there was a number of issues. I mean, as most of these bids or most of these agreements, acquisitions are based on certain conditionalities. So KE was also had major disputes with the government entities, SSGC and NDDC, because they were running in losses. They were not able to pay their dues to these entities. KE's claim was that KE was not able to receive, they were supplying electricity to Karachi Water Board. So they said that they were not recovering money from Karachi Water Board. So therefore, they were not able to pay to NTDC and SSGC. So that dispute is still pending. So one of the issue, I think, conditionality of SEP for acquisition was there were two major things: clearance from the government and also settlement or clarity on the what will be the amount of settlement with SSGC and NTDC, and also the tariff. So, as utility, KE was given tariffs for 7 years. It was extended up to, I think that expired in 2016. So the problem started after 2016, where in the tariff that, which KE was expecting, NEPRA did not agree to that tariff. There were significant delays, and I think the tariff that should have been finalized in 2016 was finalized in 2018. And under that is I think that is a tariff, and there are issues after that relating to that, which also I have raised in a letter. And perhaps many of you perhaps know that KE has, because I had highlighted some issues with the, how the KE was doing billing and write-offs, etc. What I consider were not right things. So KE has gone in the court and got an injunction that I should not harass them. So obviously I was not harassing them at all. Even at that time, I was, whatever I had written in the interest of KE and in the interest of shareholders and the public interest. So I will not go into those details, but only talking about facts, what has been published. We all know that, that deal of Shanghai Electric has not materialized. And subsequently, in this tariff, I think KE has not been making money. And whatever I think profits they had made, this year alone, till 9 months, I think they have already announced a loss of 42 billion rupees. And earlier also, there have been, and a lot of issues are still pending with NEPRA, some of the issues that I've highlighted. So I think estimated loss this year may be around 50 billion rupees. So what I would say is that there are significant issues with the KE. There are certain areas it has performed well. After Abraj, after 2012, I think there has been gradual reduction in the T&D losses, which have gone down from 34% to 16, 17% now. So, but then I think overall distribution companies which are in public sector, they have also reduced, T&D losses based on certain investments, especially some of the discos like Islamabad Electric, Lahore Electric, and Faisalabad. Their distribution T&D losses are even lower than Karachi Electric, despite of the fact that Karachi Electric is a private company. So I think that's a broader view. I think in this limited time, I have a lot of facts, I can go on, but I think I'll stop. Overall perspective I've given you that KE, is a mixed bag. Definitely some operational improvements have happened after 2011, after, Abraj took over. But then there are certain issues with Abraj also, which have come in the press. We all know the problems with Abraj. And now there is another problem. The Abraj shares have been, Abraj, actually, Abraj, was a private equity fund. It was investors and shareholders' money. They had invested here. So major funds of Abraj have been taken over by this company who around 52% shares in KES Power, which are owned by this gentleman, Shahryar Chishti, who runs Tevu in Pakistan, and also I think he has interest in Block 1 of Tharkol. And then there is a dispute going on now between these two shareholders. There is litigation, and there are vacancies in the directorships as well. So currently, I think KE, I think you can divide it in 3 phases. It's didn't do well at all. The initial period of privatization from 2005 till 2011, I think Raj had taken over in 2009 and 10 with some improvements in tariff and some concessions and some good management. I think they were able to reduce the T&D losses, improve efficiency, invest in generation also to some extent. So there were significant improvements till 2016. But I think under the new tariff regime, at least financial performance in last year, partly also because of the oil price increase and again, the basic issue, I think, before my closing down, the basic issue with our entire power sector, Nadeem, as you would understand, is that it is entirely in public sector. When these reforms and privatization was talked about in 90s and early 2000, the whole idea of unbundling WAPDA was that these generation and distribution companies will be privatized. That was the basis that NEPRA was established, an independent regulator was established in 1997. But the problem is, how do you expect...
Asad, let me interrupt. Yeah, आपकी बातें बड़ी अच्छी हैं. मुझे एक छोटी सी बात बताएं. As a Karachi resident, have you benefited from the privatization? Has Karachi benefited or not?
Yes, I think Karachi consumers are better off compared to at least interior Sindh. I don't know about Job, and I mean, I'm from interior Sindh, so when you compare them with HESCO and Sakhar Electric, they were already bad, and there is huge load shedding. As you know, they carry out load shedding in areas where there's a lot of theft. So, and this was started by KE itself. So I think in terms of financial performance and T&D losses, as I said, 3 utilities are better. But I don't know currently what is the state of load shedding. But, there is huge subsidy. I can share you with the figures that would run into hundreds of billions that government has been giving after privatization to equalize the tariff. Because, the cost of electricity, currently, Nadeem, nearly 85-90% of the cost of electricity is actually generation. And obviously, IPP cost is very high because of the imported fuel. The cost is very high. So in WAPDA area, in the distribution, other discos, because there is significant hydroelectricity, so relatively cost is lower. So Karachi consumer is also subsidized hugely. But in terms of service, I think KE has done well. And I think compared to the past, obviously, there is huge improvement in terms of customer service.
Great. Then let me turn to Maria Rafique. Maria, baby, you're a lawyer. मैं आपसे ये पूछना चाहता हूँ कि legally क्या issues हैं power sector में that don't allow us to privatize them carefully, don't allow us, for example, जल्दी में हम privatize करते हैं, T&D losses वगैरह बाकी losses हैं, IPPs के हम issues raise करते हैं. तो law इसमें क्या कहती है? Why is the law so unfair to the consumers and favoring only, or maybe I'm wrong, favoring only the producers and the big wigs who control the companies? क्या consumer protection कोई है कि नहीं, Maria Bibi? So Salahuddin Saab, would you like to answer that, or would you like to talk to us about DISCO performance in general? You were the chairman of IESCO. So who runs IESCO? Does the board run IESCO? Does the ministry run IESCO? And is IESCO better performing? Why is that so?
Thank you very much, Dr. Nadeem Saab and PIDE in general to invite me and allow me to give my ideas on this August forum. First of all, I would like to support the ideas of Dr. Asad. I was happy to listen all that, his analysis and result of his studies. And I think he was fair in doing that. And he had done a good study analysis. I would have been happy if Maria would have had spoken earlier, because she had been latest with the abreast with the knowledge being served in NEPRA very recently, whereas I left my service in old WAPDA in 2007 as general manager NPCC, National Power Control Center, after working in transmission and distribution. And only for last 2 years I was chairman BOD, but that was quite a bit, but not as a basic as that continuous assignment as chairman BOD against an executive. In NPCC, as I talked, thanks God, I was able to do the economic dispatch for the first time between 2001 and 7. And during that time, I reached the saving up to a saving of rupees 25 crores a day by optimizing the generation. And 25 crores a day at that time, not of today. That was something like 20% of the energy cost. And today's energy cost would be something like, huge, something like 300 billions per annum, on per annum basis. And that means 1 billion a day. And 2007, they stopped doing all that economic dispatch when I left, because it was too tedious. It demanded hard work. It demanded knowledge-based work. It demanded a good team. And the system doesn't want it. Of course, system is controlled by the government and the other agencies. So that's one thing. And K Electric also got benefit of that at that time. And then they left, they lost that to partly. But leaving that aside, now what has happened to K Electric and what has happened to discos, and how can they be privatized, and what would be happen to consumer rights? Number one thing is that in all the whole of the contract of privatization of K Electric, there is no say of the rights of protection of the citizens, consumers. Not at all. The contract only talks about 450 big consumers, which are defense or hospitals, and they say you have to make sure that supply should be ensured to this. It doesn't talk of all the new connections to be given. It doesn't talk of the rights of the consumers to give a stable, reliable, and good supply to them. That mentioned is not there. Because why? Privatization is done by some people. It's basically that human resource which does all those things. And the problem is here, as talked about by Dr. Sab also, and you also in your brief introduction, that in what way it is privatized? Which are the people who do it? How much study they make? Do they hire real, patriotic and experts in Pakistan? It's a big matter. Experts who know these things, financial experts, technical experts, and they should be patriotic. They should not make underhand deals. So those things become clear, and let us go to another entity which was privatized in the power sector. I'll just talk 2 sentences about that. Kotadu. There are 2 privatized entities in the power sector as far as I know. Number one, K Electric. But number one is basically Kotadu, as it was done in 96. And number 2, K Electric. In Kotadu, it is a simple deal to understand. K Electric is rather complicated. That was a powerhouse. The last cost price of the power generation cost under WAPDA in Kotadu in 96 June, ending 27th June 96, you can say take it as a financial year, when it was privatized, it was 1 rupee and 38 pesos. It was paying all the debts. It was paying everything to the government and to the financial agencies, because the government is the major part of the interest. The government has taken an interest of 18% right from 59 for all the monies given by the government to WAPDA power sector as a loan till 85. And then they stopped under an agreement, tri-party agreement with the government, World Bank and the WAPDA. And then they'll give you only those monies which come from the financial aid, but government kept on charging 18% compound interest on all those loans, unnecessary, illegally, and dishonestly. So result was that the things began worse from bad. And throughout this time, when they have been taking all this money, the situation is that WAPDA worsened and system, became bad. So during this time, quota due was privatized in 96, and the cost of the quota due under privatization, according to the privatization agreement, the first year after that, with the same cost of fuel and all other costs remaining the same, including the financial costs, the cost of electricity became rupees 3.61 per kilowatt hour. It is 160 or 70% higher than what it was in WAPDA. That is no way that one could say the privatization is good. And it has kept on increasing in the same ratio as it is all indexed to dollars. And during 2000, I happened to negotiate that contract along with HAPCO, and we reduced it by their return ROE by 5 to 6% through negotiations. And also we removed many of their fake kind of extra money, 7 million pounds for this, 7 for this, 7 for this, for international, aid and so on. And they did it happily. One Peter Galler, who was head of international company of 53 countries' powerhouses, he did it happily and agreed that what we have done is all wrong, all unjustified. And let me just go and see the powerhouse and so on. And I find a person, 27 years old, Pakistani, who is controlling a big module. And I've yet to see a man who is less than 45 years in international world to do this. So I, eradicate other foreigners, I file them, no need to that. And then to have that, and then they reduce the prices. In the capacity cost, they reduced, and some other costs. But just citing that, I want to tell you how privatization is done or can be done in Pakistani atmosphere, even if it comes to disco. They have been always out to privatize. The first disco is FESCO, because the people who would be the beneficiary, they have done a good analysis. And Pakistani government doesn't do the good diligence. Here it is hearsay. Here it is political relations. Here is it personal relations. It is socio-political conditions and socio-economic conditions. This is all, it happens that they do not do it. It is proven by the privatization of quota due. It is proved by other privatizations happened, and it's proved by so many other decisions like banks and so on. Now, coming to the power sector things, it has been talked about that IESCO by Dr. Nadeem Haque and also by Dr. Asad. IESCO is one of the best. Incidentally, I worked in it for many, many years as a deputy director and so on. I was once, you will be astonished, you may not believe it, when I was posted for the first time in 1983 as a field action, I was able to reduce the losses in urban area without big consumers from 22.5% to 5.5% line losses. By all means, all technical matters which could be possible anywhere in the world, and all financial and administrative matters which could be possible anywhere in the world, or which could not be possible to that extent. So such were the efforts which were made in some areas of Pakistan. So what has been done in discourse, I would like to invite you to the history or historical lessons. I'm sorry, I don't know how much time do I have. Can somebody, Dr. Saab, can you tell me how much time do I have?
जी बस कर लें जल्दी से खत्म तक है. I would like to have a discussion around the table.
Okay, right. So in IESCO's case and the DISCO's case, let me say that the DISCO's and the WAPDA combined has magnified itself 250 times total of its original size in 1959 through its own profit, despite the odds, all the odds. And the biggest odd was 80% interest, compound interest being charged by the government from 59. And all money is given back to the government in time. And WAPDA floated bonds at the rate of 19%, the highest, and paid off all of them. And while doing that, it increased its own generation by 150 times. And it increased its transfer distribution for 250 times by 96. When the blow of the things came, IPPs were not bad, but the way they were contracted, it was all bad. Let me give you one example only. The capacity cost, which is not understood by the people who decide about it. Capacity cost is based on the capacity, and how the capacity and energy are linked with. They don't understand. Even the chairman NAPRA, many of them, they didn't understand. Incidentally, I was selected as chairman in an open board chairman NAPRA in 2001, and it was approved by Chief Executive Mr. Musharraf. But then a big vested interest came in, who has very close cousins, all members of the NAPRA, all secretaries, ex-secretaries. And they said, if this man comes, we'll be caught in so many ways of corruption. And we'll be, naked about our capability and so on. So they didn't allow it. They made a case against me on a base of 42,000 rupees again in the NAP, and it ran for 1 year. And they tried to kill my family because I had been standing upright for previous 40 years in my service. Anyway, leaving that aside, this thing has happened that the sector, which was increasing 250 times out of its growth, that was the profit. It was always in profit between 59 to 96, but people didn't understand it. Neither the bureaucrats nor the politicians, journalists, accountants, nobody studied it. As Dr. Asad has said, that let us make a case study of K Electric. Then the things would be clear, very clear, done by PIDE or somebody else. There are some other case studies. I know Mr. Arshad Abbasi has done 2 studies on this, and those reports are available. He had submitted on engineer, and they should be studied for that and taken into account, and remaining work done. But now this has happened, and IESCO and some other good discos have been compensating for the bad discos. There are other discos who have 50% line losses, and the payments for the remaining 50% bill is also not forthcoming. Somewhere it's 10% coming in like Quetta, Balochistan, and some other places only 50% coming. So those discos are a drag on the good discos. So the good discos doing the best, they are, dragged by all this inefficiency, and as a result, their policies have been, taken. I'm not against privatization. I still say the privatization could be done, but privatization should be done to the companies, not transporters. First, they should be, classified. It should be identified. They should be qualified, and all the criteria should be taken. But unfortunately, in Pakistan, when it comes to that, nobody cares, because the people in the helm affairs, they say, and everybody has to do that. So that would be a wrong thing, as it happened in KSE. Dr. Asad has already highlighted that instead of a transport company, it had been done to another company which was really capable. And privatization of K Electric and DISCOs are different, quite a different. What? There it was an integrated company, generation, transmission, and distribution. Here it is only a DISCO. And privatization of DISCO would be different in many ways. Is without generation and transmission, it would be still dependent upon the common pool of purchase, where they have taken an open check from all the DISCOs. I came to know only 2 years back, that they have took a check by CPP to CPPA that they could buy or they could make contact of any powerhouse in any way, whatever wrong, or any capacity payment or anything, or to any extent by the DISCOs, and they are empowered. It should not be. It should not happen. The competition and other things being available and applicable, why is being done? So there are things which are against the NEPRA regulations, against these prudent policies, against the thing that is being done. So coming now to some of the points I would like to present. Historical lessons of K Electric should be, of course, considered. Socio-political, socio-economic conditions must be considered, and we should see the DISCOs have been given some autonomy, but they're still not autonomous. K Electric did one thing good, that they introduced smart meters under a good scheme in bigger consumers, and in first company out of the DISCOs, it has been introduced and forced to make a contract in a wrong way. Here, it was top to bottom. They started with the important consumer, big consumer. In DISCO, they have said, no, start with a consumer who has 50 units, who has 30 units. Now put a smart meter for rupees 80,000 to a consumer which has one bulb and one fan, and it is open, available like a small workshop. It doesn't mean anything, but these things are being enforced. So there are other things about that, defects in the context of privatization. The reduction in losses has to be mentioned. The parameters of efficiency in those contracts and the service to citizens and to all consumers coming in that area, their domain, as pointed out by Dr. Nadeem, that should be done. SCADA, of course, they has done one thing good. They have introduced a good SCADA in there for the transmission, a small transmission setup. WAPDA is failing on that account because of so many things. Again, that inefficiency, which is basically sponsored by the government, which is controlling them, or inaction by the government on that. Although pointed again, if we had the best SCADA, we had the SCADA, better SCADA than all of India in 1990. But now we are the poorest. We are nowhere as compared to those Indians. They have 30 states and so on, and they have.
SCADA क्या होता है? ये SCADA क्या होता है? जरा बता दीजिए.
Pardon?
SCADA क्या होता है?
Smart. I think it's called supervisory control and data acquisition.
Yeah, that's right. I see. Somebody was. It is supervisory control and data acquisition, which gives a best communication, fault-free communication of the data communication from all the powerhouses and grid stations to the control center and to other parts, whereas the power can be controlled for economy, reliability, stability, and up-to-date information and decisions and action, direct online actions on those power plants, which will ensure the reliability, stability, save us from blackouts and so on. I'm sorry I couldn't hear that. Now, this thing is being done in NTDC. NEPRA has asked it for many times. They are failing, and maybe they find something, but it's not being done. I've used the old system of SCADA, design of Z80 computers, where the hard disk was only 45 megabyte, and used that for whole of the running of the power system with a speed of 8 megabyte, and use them beneficially. But now we had installed another one much better than that, but they're not using it because there is no will. There is no political will is against. Political is to support their own people and who work or who do not work. So this is the situation. Nobody is judging them on that. The planning department, the power department, the power ministry, all of them, they have failed. So NEPRA has, of course, said it, pointed out, but still it's not happening. So regulator needs to be improved. There was a time in 2009-10 when I worked there, instead of chairman NEPRA, for which I was selected and approved by the chief executive, and they destroyed that because of different. But in 2007 to 9, I worked there as senior advisor, and I found that the regulation compliance was very poor, and there were so many things which were not happening, which should have happened, and therefore the problems are occurring on these factors. And economic dispatch is one of them, and it needs reliability. It ensures reliability also simultaneously. So then the same is about the contracts, tariff setting, license setting, and so on. Then there are, selection of officials in all those departments. NEPRA was then having 75% of their fees saved and lying without being used. They were not utilizing in 2009. And they reduced it by half. They put the principal secretary of that time, when he saw the contract, he was supposed to give a competition-based selection to the prime minister. And he said, oh, why I should allow some other secretary? Let me go. I'm leaving this job, caretaker government, I go. And he came in here. And he said, now let us finish this, because this money is all lying without. So they never hired sufficient number of experts and consultants, whereas they had money with them 10 times more than that, what they were required. In the power sector, it is opposite. In the power sector, there is no money. All money is spent on expansion, political-based expansion. So this is the way, as I say, and I have the proofs for that, it has expanded 250 times. Till today, it is 400 times expanded from 59 by WAPDA or all discos and transmission, etc., through its own resources, not by the government. As a chairman disco, I approved PC1 of 18 new grid stations and 18 old grid stations, which was delayed by the government, the planning department, Ministry of Power for 7 years. And the money was to be spent by the IESCO itself, by its own funds. It was not financial. For the last 50, 60 years, the government is showing all foreign loans as PSDP as if they are giving it. They are not giving it. People don't know. The Ministry of Planning officials don't know. The planning people don't know. It's the money earned by the people, and it's the money coming as a loan which has to be paid by the power sector companies with 18% compound interest, whatever interest their rate is fixed. So this money is only shown as PSDP.
Salahuddin Sahab, can I interrupt you? Let's come back. Let's extend the discussion. Naqvi Sahab, can you talk about, you've been associated with KE, you've been associated with Abraj, and you know about this situation very well. Can you tell us your experience with the KE privatization? Can you maybe extrapolate, since you work in England, you got a venture cap, your own private equity fund. Can you tell us what is the best way to privatize discourse for the welfare of the people and not just the welfare of the private equity funds? Ji Naqvi Sahab. And let's go back to the panel. ठीक है जी. Asad Sahab, देखिए, we've heard all this. Now the problem is, I think the way I look at it is, quite frankly, it's a common problem in Pakistan. We are a thoroughly incompetent people. We don't know how to do anything. We listen to what the donors tell us, and we just try and do things quickly to satisfy a requirement, and we just don't know what to do. I fear that. But I still want to ask you a question. If we had to do it right, would you recommend privatizing FESCO, LESCO, IESCO as such? Or is there another, or should we make the discourse smaller? And for me as a consumer to be able to switch around between them. And secondly, should we give the discourse to one party, or should we do it as they do in many parts, even the US, for example, that they put this in the stock market and put a limit on how many shares you can buy and professionalize the management? Is that a feasible option or not? But in that case, what we heard just now from Salahuddin Sahab, NEPRA is not ready to regulate the market. So this is a conundrum. Can you privatize a decreasing cost industry without regulating the market?
Yeah, thank you, Nadeem, for these questions. Let me, I think, take these few questions one by one. First of all, I think the problem with as far as principle of privatization is concerned, I think we all agree that we have to reduce the government and we need to privatize. But the problem is that privatization commission, I think that itself needs to be reformed. The privatization commission, usually headed by a secretary, then there is bureaucracy over there, and the law also has problems. It's such a bureaucratic system. And then these days, after, I think for considerable time, I don't know whether you would know or somebody would know who is the chairman, privatization commission, the relevant minister. Hardly anybody would know him. So the thing is that if we want right privatization, we, I think, need to, first of all, privatize the privatization commission itself. What I mean to say is, it has to have professional management. Okay, it should continue to have presence of some of the secretaries, some of the public sector guys. I think there should be, board members should be selected based on, their understanding and their competence, and the chairman, the chief executive. The positions of chief executive and chairman also need to be separated. So I think that can be a separate seminar. We can discuss on details, but I think one of the serious issue is that privatization commission itself has not performed. May have been few good privatizations also. They have been. The banking sector has done very well in hindsight. Government has received much more in terms of dividends and tax collections after privatization of these large banks. Before that, they used to be in losses, huge infected portfolio, etc. So now talking about how do you privatize, as to the question of whether they should be privatized, there is no question about it. They need to be privatized. How they need to be privatized, I think, and of course, post-privatization, there has to be a monitoring. One of the major gap in privatization commission is they are not engaged with what they have privatized to learn what, we all make mistakes. Even the best organization will make mistake. But the point is, we have to learn from the mistakes so that we do not repeat them. We have to adjust the law. We have to adjust the people and the governance of privatization commission, learning from the good things that we have done and learning from the bad things or the mistakes that we did. That never happens. Regarding the utilities privatization, again, I think some of the good profitable or near profitable entities like FESCO, LESCO, and IESCO may be easier to privatize. And it could, in order to ensure public interest, there could also be a public-private partnership kind of arrangement whereby management is handed over to private sector based on performance, and government nominees should continue to be on the board. That can be one model that should be considered. But the problem, Nadeem, I mean, again, coming back to KE itself, KE has 24% government equity, and they are usually a nominee of the Ministry of Finance and Ministry of Water and Power, and one independent, one other member nominees of the government has always remained on the board of KE. But unfortunately, their performance and their contribution is never measured. So that is the problem. I mean, unless and until we have to change the mindset of the government, I mean, and establish accountability for outcomes within the government, and that can only happen when there is more merit and when there is outcome-based governance. So if that is not there, I mean, even in the best of privatizations, you may select good people, but then if there is no monitoring, there is no regulation, then obviously even good companies can go astray, and they can start, taking advantage of that. Last point as to the regulation. Look, I mean, State Bank is also a frontline regulator, like NEPRA. Relatively speaking, State Bank regulates banks considerably well. I mean, and when they regulate banks, it's not only they do the banking supervision, they do the inspections. They also have developed a code of corporate governance in addition to SECP code, and they also monitor their governance, and they also give them autonomy to act. So the banking sector is profitable, banking issues are highlighted in the inspection report, and when there are non-compliances, violences, they penalize them very heavily. Unfortunately, in the case of NEPRA, there is no oversight of governance at all. I mean, when you raise the governance, if you look at the NEPRA's State of Industry report, by the way, I reviewed the executive summary yesterday of 22 report. It has good insights. It has a lot of comments. It has identified a lot of issues and what bad things or non-compliances are there. But the problem is it never takes action. And why it is not able to do it? Because how can a regulator, which is appointed by the government, regulate its appointees? Except for KE and even Capco now is virtually public sector. Rafai sahab keh rahe the that was the other power sector company that was privatized, but now I think majority is with WAPDA, or substantial shareholding is with the government anyway. So how does a regulator regulate the government? Obviously, it is not possible for them. So that's why they end up highlighting a lot of issues, non-compliances, but they're not able to strictly enforce. So competence is also an issue, and they never try to review the governance. I had proposed to them that they should issue, like State Bank, they should also have, for these utilities and public interest entities, their requirements for corporate governance should go beyond, the listed company code of corporate governance. So, there are many public sector companies which are listed. They comply with the listed company code of corporate governance. In the case of banks, on top of that, they also comply with the State Bank requirements on corporate governance. I think, I hope I've answered some of your questions.
Ji, Salahuddin Saab, if you like to add something to it.
Yeah, what I wanted to point, I think I agree with Dr. Shah on these points, but I want to add that when we compare various organizations, we should look at their networks, their details. For example, K Electric is a company which is serving only a dense area or city, urban area, with highest number of consumption per consumer, with 45% industrial consumers, which give better pay tariff. And we can't compare it to another company. Overall, all the discos taken together has 24% industrial consumers. They have commercial consumers like 8% consumption, but K Electric has about 20%, which is the highest rate. And then the cost for giving a connection or supplying power to a connection is the smallest in K Electric because it is dense. It is all urban. And all other discos are all rural and urban. These companies have agriculture consumers. They have villages, and villages. In case of villages, you might be making a 10 times bigger line to supply a consumer as compared to K Electric. But on the coming to another side, in 1980, let me remind you that when it was a company, K Electric is basically structured a company from historically in the beginning. And these companies are not. These are bait companies. And they're still in the process of corporatization. And we try to do it in IESCO. It was not liked by many people because they want to keep a hold. So what is important is that as a company, as said, proposed by Dr. Shah, that they should be corporatized in with all the corporation matters and improvements. K Electric losses were 15%, by the way, in 1980. And when full government control was inserted, the losses went to 37% in early 2000s. Whereas during the same time, the WAPDA losses were 37% in 1980. But through better schemes, hiring consultants and having good implementation of commercial procedure, the losses of WAPDA got decreased from 37% in 1980 to about 20% in 1990. And then further on from 1990 till today, they have come down to something like 16%. I'm talking of transmission and distribution. The distribution losses, as you say, they vary, starting from 8% in IESCO, a little more in FESCO, little same in GAPCO, a little more in LESCO, and then a bit more in MAPCO, and then you reach to 30s, the percents. So all these matters, their cause is hidden in the socio-political things. Yani a company of Sindh, which was HESCO, has an overall less revenue and less area as compared to, for example, IESCO, has been made into two, only on political reasons, just for personal controls. So both of them are having losses, one having losses 35% line losses, and the other having 35% and huge financial losses. And if we privatize FESCO or IESCO or LESCO, let me tell you that we are going to give a route towards the dissolution of the country. Why? These companies, good companies, having 60% consumption, are saving the bad companies. They are subsidizing. It's not the government which is subsidizing. It is these companies who are subsidizing. And once they do not, the tariff of the PESCO, Peshawar Electric Company, as determined by the NEPRA, would be minimum 2 times more than the IESCO and FESCO. And you charge them, they come with a demand that give us the Tarbela, give us this, give us Varsak, and all hydro, and go away with your electricity. Only the higher rate of electricity, when charged, will create a huge problem. Already there are problems. We should understand that. And we should find a solution which fits or which suits or which resolves all the problems. It needs a huge participative study, work, discussion, and then it can't be done in a small time. I have just written in 15 minutes about 38 points to discuss, but naturally there's no time. And these are the few things I say. We have to be extra cautious in selecting the company to be privatized. Study its pros and cons, not that it is easier to do. Whatever easier to do, it's always not good. Maybe it's bad. Maybe we should go to the worst company. For example, why not privatize Sakkar? Why not privatize another company? And could we in smaller portions otherwise, or privatize them through sale of shares and give the management to the private company? What are the other modes possible instead of handing it over straight away, as suggested by Asad? There could be many modes. And then a mode should be selected. They should be privatized because there are problems with this control still. For example, the best companies, IESCO, FESCO, GAPCO, going in profit, those companies, despite the fact that they are being, put in wrong shapes by the NEPRA as a common tariff, it was decided that the tariff should be based on each disco on its own cost, but it's not being done. So, despite that thing, there are reasons which should guide us towards selection of the DISCO, the mode of the privatization. And in these companies, there is one way of corruption, that is in connections. So they don't steal electricity. The people, the officials do not go join the people who steal electricity. That's why the line losses are not only line losses are 8%, including transmission, but all the bills are paid. That means the billing is right. It's not overbilling. If it was overbilling, they would not get paid. 100% payment. And when I was there, I improved the number of connections to 2 times, 200% I took. And it was not liked by the people, because there are other things where we would like to use autonomy. And as I said, we have approved the grid stations, which will reduce the losses from 8 to 4% in coming 3-4 years automatically. These are big steps. But the government and the people who are at the helm of it, they say, oh, no, let us decide. Why you decide? And they do not allow the appointment of right people at all. And the people are dying because untrained people are being climbed up on the poles, and they die of the accidents. But they don't they don't allow appointment, because they wrongly consider that this money is being paid by the government. They are paying nothing. Government is not paying anything. It's the consumer. It's the consumer who is the owner of the babda. All the consumers who have paid electricity have paid for the grid station, the power station, the transmission line, the powerhouses, the IPPs. 80% of the cost of the IPPs, which is 3 times exaggerated, has been paid by the consumers and is being paid by the consumers. Dr. Asad, this is for your information. I wish to connect sometimes with you. I'm impressed by your talk.
I have I think what happens, perhaps you're largely right, but I think basically most of these DISCOs do not pay for their power purchases to the CVPGA, who are in losses, and then they don't pay to the power companies, and then that's how the circular debt develops, and a lot of the losses get into the circular debt. That's why we have 2.7 trillion rupees in the power sector. It's largely expensive IPP cost and the distribution losses, basically, which are higher than so it. But the government last budget, government did pay. To subsidize, like for instance, to reduce the tariff and other ways. Around 1.1 trillion in this year's budget. Also, they have budgeted 1 trillion subsidy, largely for the power sector.
Thank you, Asad Saab. Before going to the floor, let me invite Ovais Naqvi Saab. Please, Ovais Naqvi Saab, your thoughts on the privatization of DISCOs and K-Electric experience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. And apologies, I joined early and then had an interruption of a call, which I couldn't get out of, unfortunately. So apologies to everyone. So, I think, the core of it's been covered. I obviously heard enough of the very accurate retelling of the history of K-Electric from a trading, operating perspective. The only thing I can add is from live experience of having been part of the leadership team. Obviously, Al Jumeirah acquired, post-privatization in November 2005. And Abraj, and through its IGCF fund, acquired an interest in the business, subsequently took over management in 2008. And then the full agreement was signed in April of 2009, if I recollect. And we were in there. A couple of colleagues were in there from mid-2008, given the operating urgency of challenges around Siemens, frankly, not being there, Al Jumeirah being somewhat out of their depth on the operating side. They'd admit that. They're good friends, but they'd admit there wasn't really an operating focus that was going to save that company at that point. And we came in, and then subsequent to that, 2008 to 2012 was a kind of stabilization mode. And then, as was accurately pointed out, 2012 onwards, post-labor disputes around that period and the union issues, we were actually on a pretty much winning streak in some ways from a performance perspective. And then subsequent to that, the Shanghai Electric, MOU effectively was signed, and we announced that in, I think, 2016. And then, that deal was never consummated. which is a shame because obviously circumstances on all sides stop that from happening, both political as well as Abraj itself. As we know, the history of Abraj post 2018 was a significant factor. Liquidators then subsequently took over the IGCF stake, and then subsequent to that, we've seen a transfer of ownership. So I think it's important to recognize. The only thing I would add is all investors in this business have done this investment for broadly a combination of financial reasons, which is always the right reason to invest. You don't invest for emotion, and you don't invest for sustainability and all the other goals. They're relatively secondary. We invested, as did Al Jumeirah, as have now, Asia Park, for the purposes of turning this into a profitable, successful company, and to build, a platform that creates value for the citizens of Karachi, on the basis that Karachi is an engine of the national economy. And, if we can make every aspect of the business work, it makes the privatization thesis work, it makes the core business work from a profitability perspective, and it gives, the average Karachiite ample means to have at least the company serving them in the way that it should. So, I think any question around intent is the wrong angle. I mean, the point is, we did it certainly in Abraj for very good reason. We did it because we believed we could make a difference to Pakistan, in addition to creating a highly powerful engine for emerging markets economies. And many people recognized that. And there was certainly a point when everyone from Wharton to London Business School to Harvard, Asim Khwaja, Josh Lerner, everybody was trumpeting the fact that this was one of the unique turnarounds in private equity in emerging markets. So, that's the kind of context. And if anyone wants to flag anything specific, I'm happy to do that. If you need any more detail on investment thesis and so forth. But broadly speaking, that was the goal. I don't think it was achieved fully. Let's see where we stand now in the coming years.
Thank you, Naqvi Saab. Let's take a few questions, then I'll go to the panel again. Mohammed Jahanzeb, please unmute yourself and ask the question.
Thank you so much for organizing this conversation and giving us the opportunity to understand the power dynamics and how the privatization should work. While listening to all this conversation, I saw a lot of comparison between K Electric and other distribution companies. I heard Asad Ali Shah Saab speaking, despite being the criticizer of K Electric in the past, but he also spoke about the things that K Electric has been able to do, the transformation it has brought. I want to further understand that what needs to be done in the future for other distribution companies to be privatized. One angle that he talked about is that post-privatization audit of some kind. This was very good. But if we can go further, what has been, we stop discussing about what has been done and what should be done in the future. That would be more helpful if we can have a few more discussion on that.
Let's take another question also, then I will come to the panel again. Law Today Newswire, please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Yeah, I have a question for Shah Saab, that we have talked about transparency. Can you tell us how you can speak about it when you are barred by the court? How are you not violating the court orders?
Yeah, thank you very much. Can I respond to that, Afia?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I have been. The order from the court is KE went there and they are saying I'm doing harassment. I'm harassing KE, which is not at all factual. I've never harassed KE, and obviously that's why the issues that I have raised in that letter, I'm not speaking on that, and there's no bar on me on speaking on facts and public interest issues. So I think I'm quite comfortable, no issue on speaking on facts. And whatever I've said, I think I have said from the annual reports of the KE itself. And a court has not barred me on speaking on facts and on KE. It's not that kind of an order.
Fair enough. Law Today Newswire, please unmute yourself and ask a question. Then I'll go for the final comments from the speakers. Okay, final words from you, Dr. first from Sayyid Asad Ali Shah Saab, then I'll go to Salahuddin Rafai and then Naqvi Saab.
Yeah, I think the question that was raised was that apart from looking at history, and obviously when we are looking at history, I think the only purpose to examine and review the history is at least to learn from it, so that, as I said, KE's privatization has also been quoted as Ovais Naqvi Sahab said that it was for some period, I think it was considered that it was a model. A lot of good things were also have been said about KE, and some of them are true. But I think there has been no comprehensive study. In fact, one serious issue, there are certain material issues that need to be settled. I think one of the issues that we must talk about is that a privatization commission has not fulfilled its role properly, not only in terms of doing proper shortlisting or some criteria. Obviously, they can make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But then they also remain responsible for monitoring the transactions. They also have the powers to carry out some examination and address issues. Similarly, NAPRA, I mean, there has been dispute between KE and SSGC and NTDC for nearly over 10 years. I mean, since 2009, 2008-9, I think it's 14, 15 years. And there is government has not done anything. It is and when there is dispute between for instance, in the currently also, with when the company is actually in huge losses now, nearly 50 billion rupees, and they have huge claims, tariff differential claim, nearly 300 billion rupees they are claiming to be outstanding against government. Some of it may be right, some of it may not be right. But the government is not resolving, not making determination. And NAPRA is not playing any role. So State Bank, for instance, I mean, in the case of bank sponsors, they not only do fit and proper of directors, they also ensure that the sponsors who appoint the directors have some credibility. So the problem, we in this 2018 NAPRA Act, there was a requirement that because power sector is one of the major issue for the country, it is the sector which has virtually bankrupted the country. Our biggest problem is mismanagement of power sector, and it is all within the public sector. So neither we have privatized properly, nor are we regulating it properly. There are a few other things. I mean, maybe I think I have one or two other issues I will speak on that. Once other speakers have spoken on this. But what I'm saying is that indecisiveness of the government, really, and not solving the problems. I mean, that is the worst than making mistakes even. I mean, no decision making on the tariff differential claims of KE that run into hundreds of billions. So, I mean, how would people come and invest then if there is no policy? And I was talking about, yes, there was a requirement under the law that it's actually the government's role is to make a policy. So it took them 3 years. In 2021, they have issued the overall electricity policy. But even NAPRA has raised issues with that policy. And the other thing they were required was to develop a national plan, electricity plan, which they have still not prepared. So the issue is with our energy ministry, with our water and power division, with the privatization commission, with NAPRA. I think it's an issue of competence. It's unless and until we put right people and establish a framework of accountability for outcomes, I think we'll continue to go down the drain.
Thank you, Shah Saab. I think they have made some plan, but it's at the stage of approval. Anyways, next I'll go to Ovais Naqvi Saab for your final thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'd mirror a lot of that. You cannot make these situations work in isolation. You can't make them work in isolation of history. You can't make them work in isolation of stakeholders. and you can't make them work in isolation of national policy, and you can't make them in isolation of stability in the political national environment. Pakistan is now undergoing another phase of perceived global instability. I mean, if you look at events of the last few days, if I was a foreign investor looking at this country over the last 2 to 3 years, I'd be completely spooked. I'd be extremely wary of putting money in. And I don't think any investment committee of any global private equity fund would look seriously at a privatization opportunity unless they feel that they have some form of leverage or some alternative way to make it work. The lesson I learned in K Electric is, you invest in companies, you try and build almost a kind of a perfect outcome, something that works, something that, is an efficient operating model that actually creates value, that creates stakeholder value, shareholder value. The lesson I learned was it's nearly impossible to make this work. You can only make it work to a degree before exogenous factors kick in. And for every couple of meters you go forward, you go back 1 or 2 meters. And that's unfortunate, and it sounds pessimistic, but, I've now got a 15-year history, having been involved in 2008. And I saw things improve and worsen, macro change, macro stabilize, etc. So, really the best of luck to anybody who invests in this business and wants to make it work. But, there's no perfect outcome. You can only make it work to a degree.
Okay, thank you so much. Salahuddin, Rafai sahab, your final thoughts.
Thank you, Afia. Well, as I said earlier, that the devil lies in the details. So it would not be possible to make policies and take actions without studying things in detail and checking everything, in accordance with that. For example, as I said, that we should compare different discos. The only disco which could be compared to the distribution part of K Electric is Lahore, which has a smaller rural area comparatively and has a similar congested network, which is good for smaller length of lines and smaller losses, therefore line losses. But all other discos have huge number of lines, rural areas, rural electrification, and therefore higher losses. They cannot be compared directly with the K Electric. And then the socioeconomic conditions of KPK and Balochistan and some rural area of Sindh, they also affect that much. So some policies have to be taken to the problems which had been identified, which must be identified beforehand. And while doing that privatization, these things must be considered very well. And targets should be fixed in accordance with that. And monitoring should be done, losses and services, the giving of connection, safety, reliability, and financial working, their employments, and people should be employed based on merits and not on, hearsay and political influences, which is being done, is continued even now. So these things, when taken together and the monitoring is done objectively in detail and improvement is done, only then the distribution. On the other hand, Dr. said that power sector is the biggest issue. Yes, it is an issue now, but this was power sector was the problem-solving thing. It was the biggest contributor towards the economic growth when it started with the hydropower in 1959, when they changed from old provincial public control companies of 118 megawatt and handed over to WAPDA, and that it increased from 118 to 15,000 megawatt of its own through profit, and 300 times of the network length lines through profit, which is not known. Please, I would request you to please check all the annual reports from 59 till 96, and you'll find these things, that the huge interest and debt servicing paid by the public power sector, and still increase itself in 250 times in a country where railway lines network came down from 9,000 kilometers to 6,000 kilometers, 33% depth. 33% decrease. And here it is a department which increased itself, which increased the power supply, and there was not a single agriculture tube well till 1960. There was not a single village electrified till 1960. And it electrified all those areas. The agriculture production, which was not enough for 2 crores in 1952, it became, huge, sufficient for 224 crore people, and then also exporting. And then the industries were based on these agriculture produced, like husk, textile, rubber. All the industries were made on these raw materials based, which were produced and which were increased by 100 times the agriculture produced because of agriculture tools, because of cheap electricity, because of industrialization and electricity availability. Also Karachi and here everywhere. And for that increased the GDP to what we are today. But then there have been lapses on other accounts. Economical growth and over economic policies and implementation more than that has not been right for economic development. Therefore, people are unable to pay. And in IPPs, I talk only one thing, that Egypt and Bangladesh signed IPPs for $7 per kilowatt capacity payment. And for lesser efficiency plants, we signed for $18. It's almost, 1:3. And that has come to 1,800 billion rupees today, capacity payment. So circular debt has to be there. Nobody can pay that. These poor people who are, under that economic poor policies and not been developed, jobs are not there. People are there, there are no jobs. The factories are, they have closed down. So what is happening? They can't pay this cost of electricity, many of them, 50 rupees per unit. And then, above all, the government is taking care of their own follies, who did wrong things. They are charging 18% sales tax. So they are recovering 500 billions of sales tax out of this electricity, which they were not taking. What is the subsidy? I doubt these figures of subsidy of 980 or 1,000 billions kept. The IMF is, opposing it. I think they don't have kept it. It is wrong to state. Please check. Let us check the figures. What would be the real subsidy? And the subsidy goes to the consumers, not to the utilities. It goes to the consumers. They pay on their behalf. And still, the circular debt is increasing. And circular debt, yes, it's a big problem. It's a big issue. But power sector itself is not an issue. Power sector has to be improved to address all the issues. And it has helped develop economy. It has helped develop health sector, education sector, defense, everything. Because of this, from 1960, our GDP has increased tremendously. Otherwise, we were nowhere. And then now we are what we are. But then we stopped. We erred in many things, economic policies, governance, and so many things which need to be right. And I support Dr. Asad's remarks about the privatization commission and many other things. And to invite people like PIDE and other departments to go have an exercise of doing the research work, case studies, and only then the case study which was done by PIDE, I appreciate that, and a book presented, but that should be maybe revised in the second stage after looking into some of the factors which has been presented by this gathering, the speakers of this gathering. And let us improve and give a way out, road ahead, how to improve the things, not only for the power sector, but for the country's economy. Thank you very much.
Afia, if you allow me, one or two points, I think it's very important for the audience to know that, by the way, Karachi Electric is one of the old, when it was KESC, Karachi Electric Supply Corporation. It was incorporated in 1913. During British time. It is probably the oldest company or second oldest company, in Pakistan. It was in private sector. It was a first listed or second listed company when the Karachi Stock Exchange was established. And it was a profitable company, as Salahuddin was saying. And so were many other companies. Interestingly, even railways, when British started, these were private companies, and the Railway Act was to regulate them. The problem in this country is that we have, the government has took over virtually everything, and then government obviously messed it up. So I think in terms of basics, I mean, Nadeem had asked whether they should be listed on stock exchange, Karachi Stock Exchange. I mean, KE is already listed. It is so. This entire problem is that regulator, will become effective when the regulatees in private sector. Regulator cannot regulate its own appointers, Ministry of Power and Ministry of Energy and the Prime Minister. So that is why only entity effectively for regulation is Karachi Electric. And even there, I think regulator is not able to regulate. So we need to rethink about the regulator. There has been no study or evaluation of the regulators in Pakistan. There should be impact assessment and review, independent review. In UK, there is an organization which does reviews of the regulators also. So basically, government needs to cut down, government needs to privatize, and government needs to have smart policies and efficient and smart regulators. That's the only way to go forward. Otherwise, Pakistan today is, I've already written on the budget. Last year, our deficit, fiscal deficit to GDP ratio was virtually 14.8, 15%. And the government expenditure is now 28 trillion, out of 86 trillion rupees GDP. So there is no private investment. Entire savings, domestic savings, the government borrowing now last year was 4.4 trillion, whereas entire increase in domestic savings was less than 3 trillion rupees. And it's the same thing next year also, government's requirement from borrowing. International borrowing is in addition. The expected borrowing that has been announced in the budget is over 5 trillion. So there is not going to be, there is no money left for private sector in Pakistan, by the way. But anyway, that's another discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Asad Saab. Thank you, Rafai Saab, and thank you, Naqvi Saab. Definitely at PIDE we'll do another in-depth study on the subject, studying all the distribution companies, K Electric, and all the other matters, which we left in our earlier version, in our earlier study on the power sector. Thank you all for your time and your thoughts, sharing your thoughts at this PIDE forum. And thank you all the participants as well as our greatest speakers, Asad Ali Shah Saab, Rafai Saab, and Naqvi Saab. Till then, see you next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
With this, we close the session. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz ji.